Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un is one of the most feared and despised leaders of the modern era. Born in 1984, he inherited power after the death of his father, Kim Jong-il, in 2011. At the time, many outsiders thought he would be too young and inexperienced to hold on to control. Instead, he quickly established himself as an absolute ruler and turned North Korea even deeper into a dictatorship defined by brutality and fear. From the beginning, Kim Jong-un ruled through purges and intimidation. High-ranking officials, including his own uncle Jong Song-thaek, were executed in spectacular fashion to send a message that no one was safe. Reports of torture, starvation, and political prison camps shocked the world. Defectors described conditions so harsh that entire families disappeared behind barbed wire fences, never to be seen again. International organizations have documented countless human rights abuses, making Kim one of the most hated leaders alive today. At the same time, he pursued nuclear weapons with relentless determination. Despite global sanctions and isolation, North Korea tested missiles and carried out nuclear explosions, raising fears of war across Asia. Each launch was both a demonstration of power and a reminder that he was willing to defy the entire international community. For many people, Kim Jong-un became not only a cruel dictator for his own people, but also a global threat capable of destabilizing the world. Inside North Korea, the regime has cultivated a cult of personality around him. State media portrays him as a godlike figure, caring for the people and standing strong against foreign enemies. But outside the country, he is largely viewed with contempt. Images of malnourished children, families living in poverty, and soldiers pledging blind loyalty to him have fueled the world's anger. Kim Jong-un remains an unusual mix of ridicule and terror. Some see him as almost cartoonish with his distinctive appearance and staged propaganda videos, but the reality is deadly serious. Under his leadership, millions remain trapped in one of the harshest regimes on earth. Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu is one of the most polarizing figures of our time, and for millions of people across the world, he has become the very definition of hatred. He was born in 1949 in Tel Aviv, and by the 1990s, he had risen to dominate Israeli politics. As prime minister, he promised strength and security, but what followed was not peace. It was deeper division and decades of bloodshed. To his supporters, Netanyahu is a defender of Israel, a leader who stood firm against enemies and guaranteed the survival of his nation. But to much of the world, he represents something entirely different. He is seen as a symbol of occupation, oppression, and the endless blockade of peace. His policies expanded settlements, rejected negotiations, and left entire generations without hope. During the devastating Gaza offensives of 2023 and 2024, his global image was sealed. Footage of flattened neighborhoods, thousands of civilians killed, and millions displaced spread across every screen in the world. For his critics, he was not just another politician making difficult choices. He was seen as the architect of suffering. From the Middle East to Africa, from Asia to South America, Netanyahu became the most hated living politician on the planet. In cities across Europe and North America, mass protests branded him a war criminal and demanded his removal. Even inside Israel, he remains a deeply divisive figure. His corruption trials, his constant battles to stay in power, and his attempts to weaken the judiciary plunged the country into one of its worst internal crises. For many Israelis, he is no longer the man who guarantees security, but the man who is tearing the nation apart in order to remain in control. Benjamin Netanyahu has become a global symbol of hatred, oppression, and political failure in the face of human suffering. While a share of his supporters still see him as a strongman who defended his people, for most of the world he now stands as the clear number one among the most hated humans of our time. Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin is remembered as one of the most ruthless leaders of the 20th century. Born in Georgia in 1878, he rose from poverty to become the absolute ruler of the Soviet Union after the death of Vladimir Lenin. By the late 1920s, he had consolidated power, eliminating rivals and building a dictatorship that would define the lives of millions for decades. Stalin transformed the Soviet Union into an industrial and military superpower, but the cost of this transformation was catastrophic. His policies of forced collectivization led to mass famine, most infamously in Ukraine, where millions starved to death in what is known as the Holodomor. Anyone who resisted his rule risked imprisonment, torture, or execution. The secret police watched every move, and fear became a way of life. During the Great Purge of the 1930s, Stalin ordered waves of arrests and executions against his own party members, military officers, and ordinary citizens. People disappeared in the night, sent to gulags in Siberia, where they faced starvation, forced labor, and disease. Historians estimate that tens of millions of people suffered or died as a direct result of his rule. When the Second World War broke out, Stalin at first signed a pact with Hitler, shocking the world. But when Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, he repositioned himself as the great defender of the motherland. The Soviet victory over Nazi Germany came at an enormous cost, with more than 20 million Soviet citizens dead. Even in triumph, Stalin remained paranoid and brutal, ensuring that no one around him could challenge his authority. In his later years, he became increasingly suspicious, even of his own doctors, and unleashed new campaigns of repression. When he died in 1953, millions cried in the streets, but many others secretly celebrated. His death left behind a nation traumatized by decades of fear, but still shaped by his iron rule. Pol Pot. Pol Pot is remembered as one of the most brutal dictators of the 20th century. Born Salath Sar in Cambodia in 1925, he studied in Paris during his youth and was introduced to Marxist and Maoist ideology. When he returned home, he helped form the Khmer Rouge, a radical communist movement that would soon take control of the country. In 1975, after years of civil war, the Khmer Rouge marched into Phnom Penh and seized power. Pol Pot declared the birth of a new era. He envisioned a society with no cities, no religion, no private property, and no intellectual class. To achieve this, he emptied the capital and forced millions of people into the countryside to work in collective farms. What followed was one of the most horrific genocides in modern history. Doctors, teachers, monks, and anyone with education or foreign connections were singled out. People wearing glasses were sometimes executed simply because they were thought to be intellectuals. Families were torn apart, children were taken from their parents, and mass executions became routine. Starvation and disease spread rapidly, as Pol Pot's policies devastated the nation. Between 1975 and 1979, an estimated 2 million Cambodians, about a quarter of the population, lost their lives. Pol Pot ruled through fear, but his grip on power was not unbreakable. In 1979, after border clashes with Vietnam, the Vietnamese army invaded Cambodia and drove the Khmer Rouge from power. Pol Pot fled into the jungle, where he continued to lead guerrilla forces for nearly 2 decades. Internationally, he became one of the most hated men alive, a symbol of cruelty and fanaticism. By the late 1990s, his own followers began to turn against him. Frail and isolated, he was placed under house arrest by rival factions of the Khmer Rouge. In 1998, just as he was about to be handed over to an international tribunal, Pol Pot died in his sleep. Some believe he took poison to avoid justice. Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler remains one of the most hated figures in all of human history. For many, his name alone has become the ultimate symbol of cruelty and destruction. He was born in 1889 in Austria and rose from obscurity as a failed artist and soldier to become the leader of Nazi Germany. By the 1930s, he had seized absolute power and plunged the world into one of its darkest chapters. Hitler's ideology of racial supremacy and conquest led directly to the Second World War, a conflict that killed more than 70 million people worldwide. His policies of extermination targeted Jews, Roma, Slavs, and countless others. The Holocaust, one of the most systematic campaigns of mass murder in history, remains the ultimate reason why his name is still synonymous with evil. Entire communities were wiped out, families were destroyed, and Europe was left in ruins because of his vision of empire. By early 1945, Hitler's dream of a 1,000-year Reich had collapsed into rubble. The Soviet Red Army closed in from the east, while American, British, and French forces advanced from the west. Germany's cities were reduced to ashes by bombing raids, and his closest allies were abandoning him or seeking peace on their own terms. In the final weeks of the war, Hitler retreated to his underground bunker in Berlin, where he issued increasingly delusional orders that no one followed. On April 30th, 1945, with Soviet forces only a few hundred meters away, Hitler ended his life inside the bunker. His longtime partner, Eva Braun, whom he had married the night before, also took her own life. Their bodies were carried into the garden of the Reich Chancellery, soaked in gasoline, and set on fire under constant artillery fire. Even in death, Hitler left behind chaos and destruction. Germany surrendered only days later, but the world would never forget what he had unleashed. His reign of terror not only caused the deaths of millions, but also left an enduring scar on humanity. Decades later, his name remains the ultimate symbol of hate, and for many people he is the most despised man to have ever lived. Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden is one of the most infamous and hated figures of the 21st century. Born in 1957 into a wealthy Saudi family, he could have lived a life of privilege and comfort. Instead, he chose a path of extremism. After the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, bin Laden joined the fight as a young man and built networks that would later become the foundation of his own militant organization, Al-Qaeda. In the 1990s, he declared war on the United States and its allies, accusing them of exploiting the Middle East and supporting corrupt regimes. His organization carried out a series of bombings, including attacks on U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998 and the bombing of the USS Cole in 2000. These acts already made him one of the most wanted men on the planet, but nothing compared to what would happen next. On September 11, 2001, Al-Qaeda carried out the deadliest terrorist attack in history. Hijackers flew passenger planes into the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington, killing nearly 3,000 people in a single morning. The images of burning towers collapsing were broadcast worldwide, and bin Laden instantly became the face of terror and hatred. For many, he was not just an enemy of the United States, but a threat to all of humanity. The U.S. launched a global war on terror and invaded Afghanistan to topple the Taliban, who had sheltered him. For nearly a decade, bin Laden remained in hiding, a shadowy figure whose voice surfaced only through recorded messages. To his followers, he was a hero of resistance, but to the rest of the world, he was the most hated man alive, blamed for wars, instability, and countless civilian deaths. On May 2, 2011, after years of intelligence gathering, U.S. Navy SEALs tracked him to a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. In a midnight raid, bin Laden was killed. His body was buried at sea to prevent his grave from becoming a memorial. For many, his death brought a sense of justice, but the damage he caused continues to shape global politics. If you'd like to see more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.